Brother Beveridge has served for 31 years in the full-time service, 22 years in the missionary work, where he served in Portugal and Spain. The last 4.5 years, he's been serving at Brooklyn Bethel. My pleasure now is to introduce to you Brother Eric Beveridge.
First of all, brothers, I would like to thank you for the invitation for my wife and myself to come here and to be able to speak to you today. And I bring you very warm greetings and love from the largest theocratic family in the world, referring to the Bethel family over there in Brooklyn, New York. We are a family of 2,500 at the headquarters, the world headquarters of Jehovah's organization, and then over 900 presently working at the Society's farms, where likewise we have tremendous expansion. I was at the farm a few days ago, and the Society has now doubled the size of the dining room. So that shows that we are thinking in terms of expansion in many ways. And when we talk about a big family, it's easy to say 2,500 in Brooklyn, but you think of preparing breakfast for 2,500 and think in terms of doing boiled eggs for 2,500, and you get an idea of what a project that is. Represents about 6,000 boiled eggs for one breakfast, separated into hard-boiled and soft-boiled, though you can't always tell the difference. But this marvelous family from so many nations and speaking many languages sends its warm love to you. And I would also like to include special greetings, for I have with me, visiting from England, my own brother in the truth, Bob Beveridge, and his wife Iris. It's their first time to the United States of America, and they come from a little congregation in the north of England called Barnard Castle in County Durham, and their little congregation of about 32 publishers wishes also to bring warm love to all of you here. In the introduction by the chairman, you heard a little about our biography. One detail that we failed to mention, that you might have realized by now, is that we were not born in the United States. And the accent is not Australian, it is English. And this was a freak of history, we might say. My mother happened to be in England when I was born, and therefore that puts the label on me. But with regard to the history of being in full-time service and missionary activity and Bethel activity, I would like to mention one scripture to help us to keep all of these things in a right perspective. If you'd like to turn with me to Luke 17, verse 10. Luke 17:10. There Jesus said, "So you also, when you have done all the things assigned to you," and that's the first problem. How often can we say we have done all the things assigned to us? I certainly cannot. There are many things yet undone. But if on any occasion we could say, "Yes, Jehovah, I have done all the things you assigned me to do," whether as an elder, ministerial servant, pioneer, publisher of the good news, Jesus still says, "Say, we are good-for-nothing slaves. What we have done is what we ought to have done." Now that is summed up in one four-letter word that is not necessarily very popular in our modern world, and that word is duty. To do your duty. D-U-T-Y, your duty. Because Jesus here is speaking of our duty as Christians, as dedicated Christians. We are good-for-nothing slaves. What we have done is what we ought to have done. And therefore, can anyone boast if they have spent 30, 40, or 50 years in full-time service, or been in missionary activity, or pioneer activity, or Bethel activity, we cannot boast. We can be thankful that Jehovah may have granted us the privilege and the strength and the circumstances, but we cannot boast, for there is no superiority in fulfilling our dedication. And this is the point that we're making here. I'm sure that most of you in this audience, if your circumstances allowed it, would be serving in Bethel also. Or you'd be serving in a missionary assignment also, if your circumstances allowed it. But your circumstances do not. But you are doing your best within your circumstances. And therefore your 100% is worth anybody else's 100% in Jehovah's service. And there is no basis for boasting. So this helps us to keep things in perspective, that no one is trying to boast. And now we can turn to our theme. Do we appreciate our inheritance? We all appreciate an inheritance, even though an inheritance is usually related to a sad occasion. An inheritance is something you receive when someone has died, and that someone has left something for you in their will. It's a sad occasion, but the inheritance might be quite a windfall for you, whether it be in the form of possessions or in the form of money or property. But then when one receives an inheritance in that way, one can also apply a Spanish proverb which says, that which is inherited is less appreciated than that which is earned. Now why should that be? We can express it in an English expression, and you know the answer. Easy come. What's the rest of it? Thank you. I got nearly 100% participation already. Easy come, easy go. And that is how it can be with regard to an inheritance. So we raise the question, do we appreciate our Christian inheritance? Do you appreciate yours? What is the Christian inheritance? Let us just examine briefly some words of Peter in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. And here Peter says, Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, for according to his great mercy, he gave us a new birth to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Now Peter makes this a foundation point, a basis for our hope. The resurrection of Christ from the dead, and this is the key to the kingdom, the resurrection of Christ. Then he says, to an incorruptible and undefiled and unfading inheritance. It is reserved in the heavens for you. As soon as Peter says that, we know that he is writing to the anointed brothers of Christ, those who form the congregation of 144,000, the ones who are going to form the heavenly government. So they have a special inheritance, for as he says, the unfading inheritance reserved in the heavens for you. But we know that very few of Jehovah's people today have that particular hope. Only about 9,000 take the emblems now. 9,000 out of over 2.5 million witnesses. So then what is the inheritance for the rest of us? We find it implied in Peter's second letter, 2 Peter 3 verse 13, that there are new heavens and a new earth that we are awaiting according to his promise, and in these righteousness is to dwell. And we yearn for that. We yearn for the new system of things. We spent one day this week visiting Yosemite. In spite of the snow and the bad weather, we managed to get to Yosemite, and I was very impressed to step out at night and try to find a quiet spot in Yosemite where there be no traffic, no people, just darkness, and look up at the sky. Look up at the universe and see the stars as I have not seen them for perhaps decades. Decades of city life. But there in Yosemite, which is like a paradise itself, one has to think of Jehovah God, the Creator, and the conditions that he has promised for this earth, a restoration of the earth. And that's why we speak of a new heavens and a new earth. Now, do we appreciate those promises? Do we appreciate that life? How do we show our appreciation? Our appreciation for our inheritance is closely related to our spirituality. Now, here's a word we use very often, spirituality. What do we mean by spirituality? Here's a definition that came out in one of the publications. It is our set of spiritual values and standards that we have derived from our knowledge of Jehovah and his spiritual qualities and moral excellence. Now let's analyze that. It means that our spirituality is related to our knowledge of Jehovah and his spiritual qualities and moral excellence. Therefore, our spirituality should reflect those qualities and moral excellence. So the question, are we spiritual persons? Do spiritual values predominate in our lives? Do we have a close relationship with Jehovah? So here's the question for each one, brothers. Is Jehovah your close friend to whom you can speak freely each day and each night? For example, many of you will have had the experience that you wake up in the night. For some reason you can't sleep, you're disturbed. Maybe some slight health problem makes you wake up in the night. Well, do you have to fret? Do you have to lie in bed wondering, when am I going to get to sleep? What can I do? No. There in the stillness of the night, in your bed, you can start talking. Talk to Jehovah God. In other words, prove that you do have a relationship with Jehovah. Now this is important, brothers, because if we have this relationship with Jehovah, then we're going to have protection, because we're going to be conscious of our relationship, close relationship to God, as opposed to the situation that we find out in the world. It reminds me of when we used to preach in Barcelona, in Spain, from house to house. And you'd say to the people, well, of course, you believe in God. I mean, as a Catholic, you believe in God, right? And they would answer, well, yo creo que hay algo por ahí. In Spanish, hay algo por ahí. I believe there's something out there. So all that God is to them is something out there. What kind of relationship is that? How are we going to say that we know Jehovah if it's only something out there, some vague, nebulous concept? That's the way it is in the world. We must have a better knowledge of Jehovah our God and have a close relationship with him to have strong spirituality and thus appreciate our inheritance. So how can we best analyze our appreciation of our inheritance and at the same time see if we do appreciate spiritual values? Let us examine a true life case found in the Bible, one that we've read about and talked about perhaps many times, but let's see if we can find something new in this presentation in Genesis chapter 25, verses 27 to 34. We're going to talk about two young men, twins, Esau and Jacob. As we examine the account, let us think of their background, nomadic people, and also let us think of the psychology of the situation existing between these twin brothers. And as we examine them, we're going to find out something about their spirituality, and maybe at the same time, something about our own spirituality. So here we are. We're talking about twins, Esau and Jacob. Now, as any mother knows, by the law of nature, twins have to line up to be born. You can't give birth to two twins simultaneously, and I should imagine mothers would say, thank goodness for that. Now, it's a detail, but a very important detail. Why? Because in this case, one of those twins was going to be the firstborn. And in those days, to be the firstborn meant a big difference. Because it meant that the one who was firstborn would have a legal right to a double portion in the inheritance on the death of the father. So, for example, in this case, if we're speaking of two sons, on the death of the father, the inheritance, the possessions, would be divided into three parts. And the elder of the two sons would receive 2 parts, and the younger would receive just one part. But in their particular case, was that going to make a big difference? We're talking about flocks of animals, that's true, but we're not talking about very much land. We're talking about a small piece of land with a burial ground that they used for their family, to bury their family members. But in this case, the inheritance is dealing with something far more important. We're dealing with a vital promise that Jehovah had given to their grandfather. In Genesis 22, verses 16 to 18, we read of this promise. And in verse 18 it tells us, Jehovah's angel speaking to Abraham, verse 18, "And by means of your seed, all nations of the earth will certainly bless themselves due to the fact that you have listened to my voice." Now here's a promise that Jehovah made to Abraham. The promise had passed on to Isaac, and now, by legal right, it would go to the firstborn. And the firstborn of the twins was Esau. So here is part of the inheritance, that by means of his seed, people of all the nations would eventually bless themselves. Why? Because it meant that the Messiah, the Christ, was going to come through this line of descent. So now the question is, did Esau appreciate that inheritance? Did he appreciate Jehovah's promises in relation to the seed? So now let's go back to Genesis 25 and read from verse 27 and see what we can find out about these two young men. And the boys got bigger, and Esau became a man knowing how to hunt, a man of the field. Another translation says a man of the open plains. From other scriptures we get the idea of a restless man, an impulsive man, a rather obstinate man too. For he did not marry in accordance with the wishes of his parents. He married outside of their tribal associations and caused great bitterness to his parents. But in contrast, the scripture says, "But Jacob, a blameless man, dwelling in tents." Now the verse tells us very little, and yet we can read between the lines. For if it says Jacob, a blameless man, what is the imputation regarding his brother? It rather leads us to the idea that, okay, Jacob was blameless, but Esau, there was something about him that did not meet Jehovah's approval. And so in another translation it says Jacob was a quiet man. Jacob led a settled life and settled among the tents. So we perceive a difference already between the two. And now in verse 28, a very human touch that convinces me of the authenticity of this account. And Isaac, the father, had love for Esau because it meant game in his mouth, whereas Rebekah was a lover of Jacob. Now what does that tell us? That the parents had a favorite son. Isaac, the father, he loved Esau. Why? Because he liked to have meat on his plate. And this boy was the hunter, so he liked this boy. He brought him meat to the home. But the mother, Rebekah, she was a lover of Jacob. She had her favorite son. Now the Bible, is it recommending that parents should have a favorite son or a favorite daughter? Be very careful. But what it is telling us, here's an authentic touch. They'd fallen into this trap of having a favorite son. Now some of you may know what that means. I think I do. I'm the eldest of 4 children. And of the 4, we have a sister. Guess who was Dad's favorite? Now, it didn't have any deep impact on us, I don't think, but it could have deep impact in your family if you were to commit that error of having your favorite child. Therefore, we should be very careful in this respect. There should be love, kindness, discipline, impartiality in every family. And no child should feel that another brother or sister is being favored over him in your particular home. But here's the authentic touch in verse 28. Now the story goes on. Once Jacob was boiling up some stew when Esau came along from the field, and he was tired. So Esau said to Jacob, "Quick, please, give me a swallow of the red there, for I'm tired." When he referred to the red, well, his brother was making a stew, lentil stew, and very possibly using lentils from Egypt, red lentils. So it would make it a red stew. And so he says, quick, please, give me a swallow of the red. Even that tells us something. He's wanting to gulp it down. He wants to wolf it down. Give me a swallow of the red. Doesn't say give me a dish or a bowl or a plate. No, a swallow of the red. He says, quick, give me a swallow of the red there, for I am tired. That is why his name was called Edom, which means red. Now to this Jacob said, and here we're coming across something very unusual. This is a historic moment in Bible history. This is a moment that's going to change Bible history. Because here, Jacob comes up with a proposition, and I ask you, brothers, in the same circumstances, would you have attempted this proposition? Because listen to what he says to his brother Esau. To this Jacob said, sell me, first of all, your righteous firstborn. Now he's saying to him, I'll give you a plate of stew if you give me the right of the firstborn. Now don't you think that's a little crazy? I mean, really, would you in your right mind really expect somebody to hand over an inheritance for one plate of stew? Then why did Jacob attempt it? Because Jacob knew his brother's mind, his way of thinking, his spirituality, his spiritual values, and he thought, here's the moment. He's coming tired and hungry, and I know this man. He puts his carnal desires first. To this Jacob said, sell me first of all your righteous firstborn. And how does Esau answer? Here I'm simply going to die, and of what benefit to me is a birthright? And Jacob was right on the ball. Yes, there was Esau, saying, what good is a birthright to me? Something that might be fulfilled in generations to come, and I'm hungry right now. Maybe he was thinking a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And so he wanted his plate of stew. Never mind about that inheritance. Never mind about the promise. Here I'm simply going to die, and of what benefit to me is a birthright. But Jacob wasn't going to take it just on that basis. Jacob knew his brother. And so he said, swear to me first of all. In other words, let's make this a bona fide arrangement, a legal arrangement. Well, just note again verse 32. Esau says, here I am simply going to die, and of what benefit to me is a birthright? So according to Esau, he was at death's door. I'm simply going to die. And yet, verse 34, Jacob gives him bread and lentil stew. He eats and drinks, gets up and goes on his way. That's a pretty good resurrection. If he was simply going to die, he wasn't going to die, but he was exaggerating his condition. And sometimes we can fall into the same trap. I gave this same talk here in Woodland Hills about 2 years ago, and afterwards I received a very kind letter from a sister. And in the course of the letter she said, you know, brother, from the example that you mentioned of Esau, it taught me a lesson. She said, never again will I say, I'll die if I don't get. I'll die if I don't do. And sometimes it's an expression we use. In other words, we're saying we want something so badly that if we don't get it or we don't do it, we'll die. Well, that's the mind of Esau. We are exaggerating our needs and our desires. And so sometimes we can do it with regard to our desires for pleasure, and therefore we're willing to sacrifice something spiritual. Maybe a meeting, our personal study, fine association, preaching activity, prayer. We sometimes sacrifice these things because we feel that something material, some pleasure, is more important. And so there is a lesson to be learned in the example of Esau and that of Jacob. Now, when we analyze our condition individually and the condition of our brothers worldwide, which mentality really predominates? Do we find the mentality of Esau predominating in our congregations and in Jehovah's people earthwide, in your particular circuit? Or do we find rather the mentality of Jacob? a man who appreciated the inheritance, who wanted that blessing for his future generations. Well, we're happy to say that the majority of the brothers are following the example of Jacob. And we know this by the wonderful information that we have received recently at Bethel on the increases taking place around the earth. Now, we have evidence in a very simple matter to show that the brothers worldwide in general have an excellent attitude towards spirituality and towards their inheritance. In 1943, do you know how many witnesses there were worldwide? We're talking about 42 years ago. In 1943, just over 100,000 witnesses worldwide. And now what's the situation? We now have over 100,000 witnesses in at least 8 different countries. Take, for example, the United States. Here we have nearly 700,000 witnesses. In Italy, Catholic Italy, over 120,000 witnesses. In Catholic Mexico, over 160,000 witnesses. In Catholic Brazil, something like 160,000 witnesses. In Nigeria, over 100,000 witnesses. In Germany, over 100,000. And now, finally, in the Far East, in Japan, the land of the Shinto religion, we have recently passed 100,000 witnesses in Japan. And the 8th country, believe it or not, is the United Kingdom. I won't call it Great Britain because it's no longer great. But they have recently achieved 100,000 publishers in the United Kingdom as well. It's taken them a long time to get there in the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, and Wales, but finally they have done it. Now, this is a sign of the mind of Jacob. The brothers are appreciating Jehovah's service and Jehovah's worship. And we can mention another fact too. You may already have heard about this. We recently had talks presented at Bethel by different members of the governing body who visited Poland just 2 months ago. Some of you perhaps were there. And amazing to know that they had 4 big conventions in Poland with an attendance, if I remember rightly, of something like 96,000 people attending these 4 conventions in communist Poland. And they baptized in those conventions over 3,000 new witnesses, new brothers and sisters. Now, this really shows that the mind of Jacob is prevailing. And the latest report that you'll get very shortly in the new yearbook, if you want to take down some of these facts and figures, you're going to find them very encouraging, because it shows that Jehovah's Spirit is among his people and the work is being accomplished. We have now increased once again to 205 countries, lands, and islands where we are preaching the good news. Now, when we say 205 countries and territories, remember that the United Nations organization is represented by 159 members, 159 countries. Therefore, we are covering more of the world even than the United Nations representation. And here's an outstanding figure to show that the mind of Jacob does prevail, that the majority do appreciate their inheritance. And the figure is the average number of regular and auxiliary pioneers last year reached a peak of 310,029. And that's an increase of 25.6% over the previous year. Now, this is a marvelous increase, brothers, and I know that you have participated in that increase, and we're going to see that right now. Please raise your hands, those of you who are regular or special pioneers, and those of you who have served as auxiliary pioneers. Let's see. All you auxiliaries, regular, special, that's a marvelous harvest. Excellent, brothers. And all of you are an encouragement to each other and an encouragement to us at Bethel, who are working hard to supply you with the means for preaching this good news of the kingdom. But here are some more figures that we can give you. In the course of last year, the Society printed 530 million magazines, Watchtower and Awake magazines. We had an increase in Bible studies of 16%. we had an average of 2,379,146 Bible studies. And what about congregations? An increase of 4% in congregations. We've now reached a peak of 49,716 congregations around the world. That means probably in this service year we will pass 50,000 congregations for the first time. And the memorial attendance, once again showing the blessing that Jehovah has given to our zeal. Last year we had in attendance, well, it's this year actually, we're still in 1985, the attendance was an increase of 5%, and we had 7,792,109. That's excellent. And those who took the emblems dropped by 30 down to 9,051. Now, standing figure, the new peak of publishers preaching the good news of the kingdom worldwide. For the first time, brothers, we have passed 3,024,131 witnesses preaching the good news. That's an increase of 6%, and it's reflected in another figure. The total number of baptized in this last service year that ended in August, 189,800 baptized worldwide. So we can feel very encouraged by these figures and to see that this positive spirit does exist in our midst. Nevertheless, we recognize that some of our brothers do need help, and that's why we talk about this subject. And sometimes all of us need help to appreciate our inheritance. It's very easy for any of us to neglect our vision of the inheritance. And so that's why we can take to heart the counsel that Paul gives in Hebrews chapter 12, if you'd like to check the scripture. Hebrews 12, verses 12 to 16. Paul says, "Hence, straighten up the hands that hang down and the enfeebled knees, and keep making straight paths for your feet, that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather that it may be healed." This is an encouragement for us to remain strong in the congregation, to strengthen our own spirituality, our own appreciation for these values that we mentioned before, Jehovah's spiritual qualities and moral excellence. And that's why we have the body of elders helping us in every congregation, and the circuit overseers coming round as well, to help us to get this kind of strength, to straighten up the hands that hang down and the enfeebled knees, and keep making straight paths for our feet. Then he says how to do it. Verse 14, "Pursue peace with all people." And certainly we do that in our preaching activity from house to house. We do not go from house to house in a belligerent manner. We're not looking for arguments. We're not looking to waste our time in polemics, 2 or 3 hours with some religious fanatic who just wants to waste our time because he's figuring out, if I keep him on my door arguing about the Trinity for 2 hours, that's going to be at least 20 doors he'll never get to hit. We've got to realize that that's the way they think. No, we're looking for sincere people, people who are conscious of their spiritual need, and to these people we will take our peace, the peace of Christ and the peace of God's kingdom by Christ. But likewise, we want to be conscious of pursuing peace, as it says, with all people, therefore not just in our house-to-house ministry, but also in the congregation, because Satan is deeply envious of our spiritual condition, our spiritual prosperity, and therefore Satan will do anything to undermine the harmony of the congregation. Therefore, brothers, we have to be careful of our thinking in this respect, that we do not allow any kind of envy or discord, hatred, to creep into the congregation. And so continues Paul, "And the sanctification without which no man will see the Lord." And sanctification means separation. It means being different. And we have to be different, brothers. And I think this is something that makes us outstanding as Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a point here to bear in mind with sanctification. You see, as Jehovah's Witnesses practicing Christianity, we can never be a respectable religion. And if anyone is hoping that one day Jehovah's Witnesses will be respectable, then such a person is wasting his time. Because It is not respectable to go from house to house pestering people on a Sunday morning, or any other day for that matter. It is not respectable. Hardly anybody else does it. Why do you people have to do it? That is not respectable. But that is Christian. And that's the example that Christ left us and the apostles. Therefore, we're not interested in being a respectable religion. It is not respectable to refuse blood transfusions. Well, at least it wasn't until a short time ago. And now people are beginning to have second thoughts about the subject when they suddenly see a slice of mankind reaping the dreadful effects not only of a promiscuous way of life, but also of the abuse of human blood, when Jehovah God has given us clear commands on the sanctity of blood. And so therefore, we will not be respectable according to their orthodox medical circles. It is not respectable to refuse to do military service. It is not respectable to remain neutral in the field of politics. You've got to jump on somebody's bandwagon. And that's the whole idea. They want you to jump on their political bandwagon. We are not interested. We will not jump on their bandwagons. We will not get involved in their politics and in their conflicts and in their systematic hatred. Because let's face it, the systems of this world, political and educational, in effect teach systematic hatred. Because they teach that your country is, right, you know that gesture? What does it mean? Number one. This is the blight of humanity today. Because they're teaching it in the schools, in sport, in every aspect of life, that you've got to be number one, because if you're number two, you're useless and worthless. Now, is that the Christian mentality? Is that the kind of mentality we want to have? Not at all. For we belong to the human family. Jehovah's Witnesses are not just international, we are supranational. That means we are above nationality, and this very audience today proves it. For we are above nationality, we are above racism. We are a united brotherhood from all over the world, speaking so many languages that the society is going all out to be able to produce the literature in over 200 languages to cover the world. Well, all of this, what does it show? We are not respectable, and we are not interested in being respectable by the world standards. But on many occasions, we are respected. Now, that's different. To be respected, we are now having people coming to us and saying, I respect you people. I don't agree with you, but I respect you for your stand on blood. I now see why you were doing it. In other situations, there's, I respect your stand on neutrality. We had that happen in Spain when our young men were going to prison for 10 years for refusing 18 months of military service. When our young people in Germany, during the time of Hitler, you read the story 2 or 3 months ago, the Kosovo family in the Watchtower. Did you read about that family? 13 in the family. I think there were 11 children, right? 11 children, mother and father, back in the 1930s. You remember the story? The eldest boy was shot at the age of 24. Shortly afterwards, the next brother down was decapitated because Hitler had decided that shooting was too good for conscientious objectors. But that boy faced his death. But there you've got integrity. And when you've got that kind of integrity, people are bound to respect us, even though we are not doing that which is respectable. Because we are not following with the herd. We are separate from the herd. That's why Paul speaks of sanctification, because it is separation, being different. So he goes on, carefully watching that no one may be deprived of the undeserved kindness of God, that no poisonous root may spring up and cause trouble, and that many may not be defiled by it. And that too is involved in our appreciating our inheritance, that we should not allow any poisonous root to creep up in a congregation. Unfortunately, sometimes it happens, and the elders have to take swift action. And sometimes we do have disfellowshippings. But why do we have disfellowshippings? So that the poisonous root cannot affect other people in the congregation. The poisonous root will not have time to divide the congregation and start forming two camps, which is what Satan wants. So we keep a clean congregation. Of course, we try to help these people before they make a big mistake. If they do make a big mistake and they get disfellowshipped, well, we hope they'll come back. And when they do come back, we're happy to help them. But now notice how Paul continues. That there may be no fornicator, nor anyone not appreciating sacred things like Esau. And here we are back to Esau. We've been considering all this subject, but it brings us back to Esau. It brings us back to the mind of Esau. It says, who in exchange for one meal gave away his rights as firstborn. Now we might ask ourselves, well, what relationship can there be here between fornication and the mistake that Esau made? You see fornication as a crass sin, a crass mistake. But how can we relate it to what Esau did? Well, it's the same mentality. It's the same mentality. What were the words that Esau said? He said, quick, give me a swallow of the red. Quick. Now, often when a person falls into fornication or adultery or other sins, it's the same mentality. Isn't the person in effect saying, quick, we can have sex, we're going to get married anyway, so why should we have to wait? Quick. And so they fall into fornication. Why? The mind of Esau, for not controlling carnal desires, as the opening song mentioned for our meeting today, to control the mind. And so we read about Esau in other translations on this scripture. Watch out that no one becomes involved in sexual sin or becomes careless about God as Esau did. He was careless about God. Another translation says, be careful, too, that none of you falls into impurity or loses his reverence for the things of God like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. To lose one's reverence for the things of God. Another translation says, be careful that there is no immorality or that any of you does not degrade religion, true religion, like Esau. Be careful that no one becomes immoral or unspiritual. This is today's English version. Be careful that no one becomes immoral or unspiritual like Esau, who for a single meal sold his rights as the oldest son. So we see that it is related to spirituality. If we fall into the trap of having Esau's mentality, we will pay a high price. But here Paul in Hebrews 12 to 16 gives us fine counsel so that we can resist the mentality of Esau. We do not want to be worldly minded like Esau, unprincipled like Esau, as the Sconfield translation puts it. So then we can ask ourselves, okay, in what fields could I possibly fall into the trap of Esau, the mind of Esau? Well, Esau was hungry. He was tired and he was hungry. Now, we too can be hungry, but in a different way. Hungry for things in excess that can cut away, undermine our spirituality. For example, we are living in a pleasure-bent world. The world has got the idea that life just has to be pleasure. Or putting it in a three-letter word that you all know, life has to be fun. Right? Fun. So, especially perhaps in certain sections of the world, and even certain sections here of the United States, because climatic conditions allow people to have more fun. And as a consequence, what we might call the Sun Belt can also be the Fun Belt. Because people are only thinking in terms of fun and not duty, not responsibility, not accomplishment. Accomplishment requires hard work and effort. Now, we're not the only ones who say this. For example, we have a quote from Edward Cornish, president of the World Future Society, and he says that television viewers are being programmed with the following beliefs. Quote, everyone is entitled to a high standard of living regardless of how little work they do. Work is, in fact, largely unnecessary because all serious problems can be solved by some sponsor's product. Real effort must not go into one's job because that would interfere with the person having fun. And play, that is having fun, is the purpose of life. Now, that's the way some see it. And certainly it is the way that the majority are leading their lives. They're not really concerned about doing a good job, giving a full week's work. They are planning only for their fun and their pleasures. Now, if we go to an excess in this direction, then we get the mind of Esau. In other cases, it can be illicit sex. In other cases, it can be the desire for wealth, swiftly, quick. Give me the megabucks, quick. It could involve one in gambling, now that they're spreading the lottery and lotto all over the place. Are you going to be hooked because the prize has suddenly gone to $24 million? Are you going to line up, as they did in New York City, and spend out the best part of $100 million to justify these prizes and to try to get rich quick without actually earning it? Here's the temptation. The mind of Esau. The mind of Esau has led some to disdain their inheritance in the field of immorality, as we have mentioned before. They have chosen a fast plate of lentils. Recently, an article in a medical magazine, a woman wrote in saying that mealtime in the home was just a time of frenzy, and that the only way she could control the frenzy was by putting on television. And then they'd be eating away and watching the television. And that way she controlled the frenzy in the home. But these doctors answered and said, that's not the answer. Turn off the television when you're eating and start to build up an atmosphere of conversation. Ask the children, what did they do at school? What did they learn at school? What good things have they seen or done today? And tell them some of the good things that you've had, nice experiences. But the thing is to develop an atmosphere around the table. And we can do it with spiritual things too. That's why in Bethel, for example, every morning we have morning worship. We don't call it the daily text. See, with the idea of daily text, the tendency is read the text, read the comment, goodbye. 5 minutes, you've got it out of the way. But that's not worship. We have worship every day in Bethel. We get down for breakfast at 7 o'clock. And we have the consideration of the text by 4 members of the family. We all have a turn. You have 1 minute in which to raise a question and answer that question on the text. So after those 4 have spoken, a member of the governing body then speaks for another 10 minutes, elaborating the text and its application, especially to the Bethel family. And here's an example for us, that we can consider the text each day and think, well, how does this apply to my family? How does it apply to my children, my wife, and myself? And then it becomes part of your daily worship. So just as we in Bethel have morning worship, and that lasts till 7:15, then we start breakfast. Well, breakfast is just for 20 minutes. By 25 to 8, we have the rest of our morning worship. We read at least 2 pages of the yearbook, or else we have a reading of a chapter or half a chapter of the Bible that we all listen to. And then that concludes our morning worship, and off we go to work. Now, I'm mentioning this just as an illustration, brothers, of what we can do to make sure that we do have this force actuating the mind by having spirituality in the home, by having the mind of Jacob and not the mind of Esau. Now, obviously, this brings a great responsibility to parents. And again, I'd like to encourage you parents especially to take a loving interest in your children. Have time for your children. Right now, many people are worried, even in the world, about the kind of music that is being put out on discs and cassettes and videos. They're conscious of the fact that pornography is being put out, encouragement to go into drugs, violence, independence. Well, how can you protect your children? By checking the kind of music they are going to buy. And maybe you could start in another field already. Check the kind of music they have already bought. You see, you know the tendency as well as I do, that in your home, the children will have their own room, their den. And in their den, they even have their own stereo equipment, and they'll have their own records and cassettes. Have you ever checked to find out what kind of music they are supposedly enjoying? Have you checked the lyrics? The kind of lifestyle that music is promoting? It's very important. Because otherwise it could be undermining the values of your children. You take them to the Kingdom Hall where they listen to one set of values, they go back into their room and they're listening to another set of values in a setting that has perhaps a deeper effect. So parents, have time. Find out if your child perhaps has a plate of lentil stew right in his or her bedroom by choosing the wrong kind of music. Now, how can we choose that which is correct? Let me mention an experience. The story was in I think it was the Awake magazine a few months ago. Brother Bill Mullane, he now works at the Watchtower Farm. But he mentions in his story how he was involved in rock music. He was a rock musician. But he reached a point in life when he decided he had to change his values. And so he began to listen to other types of music. Could he appreciate other types of music? He began to listen to more melodic music, even classical music. And he realized he could change his taste. And Bill Mullane now plays in the Watchtower Society's Theocratic Symphony Orchestra. He plays double bass in that orchestra. What a privilege. Do you listen to the Kingdom Melodies, brothers? Do you like those cassettes, the Kingdom Melodies? They're beautiful symphonic renditions. Don't take them for granted. When you're listening to those cassettes, you're listening to a symphony orchestra of 60 or 70 musicians who come together for 3 or 4 days at Bethel, and they've come from all over the United States, including right here in California, and they do a miracle. As far as I'm concerned, it's a miracle. Because it is so difficult to bring together musicians and have them coordinate in such a marvelous way that within 4 days you can produce a recording that can go out all over the world. And yet these brothers and sisters do it. It's another evidence of Jehovah's Spirit working. For these are beautiful orchestrations, and each cassette is better than the previous cassette. Do we appreciate those cassettes? There's good music. And if we want to know standards whereby we can judge that which is good in the sight of God, then we have a very simple answer in Philippians 4:8. Here's your scripture, brothers, for measuring anything. Finally, brothers, whatever things are true, whatever things are of serious concern, whatever things are righteous, whatever things are chaste. Now, all of these words are a contrast with the world. The world is not righteous, it is unrighteous. Its principles or its standards are unrighteous. It is not based on truth. It's based on lies and deception. It's not interested in serious matters, just trivia. Trivia. Even the games they produce are called trivia too. Superficiality. Superficial things, not the deep things of life. So whatever things are righteous, whatever things are chaste, whatever things are lovable, whatever things are well spoken of by Jehovah, not by the world, whatever virtue there is, and whatever praiseworthy thing there is, continue considering these things. There is the measuring rod for any music, any activity, anything that we desire to see or do. Does it meet this standard? Will it edify me as a Christian, or will it undermine me? If we choose the right course, we will choose to have the mind of Jacob and not the mind of Esau. We'll choose to have the mind of the faithful and discreet slave class in the governing body, who today are going all out to make sure that we get this message preached throughout the whole world before Jehovah brings an end upon the system of things. And that's why now we are geared for action and expansion as never before. And that's why I'd just like to briefly close this opening talk with just a few facts about the things we are now doing in Brooklyn. To give you an idea of how expansion is going, brothers, about a year and a half or 2 years ago, the Society bought a factory building on Pearl Street, which is right across from our 4 factory blocks where we print Bibles and books. Now, the street that separates this new building, it's an old building, but it's new for us, from our factory complex is about 50 yards wide. It's a large, wide street. Why? Because it's the main road that leads on to Brooklyn Bridge. Now, we wanted to connect these 2 factory buildings because we want to be able to take paper across, store paper in one building, bring it across to this building. How could we do it? Only by building a bridge across this main road going onto Brooklyn Bridge. So we requested permission from the City of New York. And the city of New York finally granted us permission to build 2 columns right in the middle of this main road and then have a covered bridge or walkway connecting our factories. And last week, before we left Brooklyn, we actually saw the cranes lifting the walkway onto the pillars. We now have our bridge, so that all the traffic that flows onto Brooklyn Bridge must first of all go underneath the Watchtower Bridge. And I just hope the society will be able to put some big sign right on that bridge to remind them that they are going underneath our bridge. Now we've also got you're going to see these on the slides, by the way. We've also got the Furman Street factory, 360 Furman Street. This is 1 million square feet, 13 stories high. It's almost doubled our capacity. And yet already, because of the expansion worldwide and the demand for literature and the increase in circuits and districts, that building is already bespoken. In other words, we already know all the departments that are going to be fitted in to the Furman Street factory. The second floor is already occupied by the shipping department. We are short of living space at Bethel. Right now we're 2,500 at Bethel. If you want to come and serve in Bethel, the only way we can let you in is if somebody else leads. We have no spare beds. In fact, so dire is the situation that normally we have a hotel called the Standish Hotel where we keep some rooms for guests. Beginning in January, there will be no room for guests in the Standish Hotel. The Standish Hotel is now going to be occupied totally by workers working at Bethel because we need the space. And so we have too the Bossett Hotel on Montague Street. I'll tell you an interesting experience about this hotel. The society has not bought these 2 hotels. The Bossett and Standish have been bought by a financial group called the Cohi Group, a group of brothers who are the owners of these 2 hotels. And then they let the society use these hotels. Now, just 3 weeks ago, I was on the street trying to take a good photograph of the Bossett Hotel. It's about 12 stories high. When a man in his 60s or 70s comes up to me and says, "You want to buy that place? You want to buy that place?" You know, big deal, big joke. "You want to buy that place? You can't buy that place because those," a word I cannot use in your presence, "those so-and-sos have bought it all. They're buying up everything around here." So I looked at him and I said, "Well, it so happens that I am one of those so-and-sos." And he said, "Well," he said, "they don't pay taxes. They don't pay their taxes, you see. They don't pay their taxes." And his wife pipes up as well, "They don't pay taxes. They don't pay taxes." I said, "Well, wait a minute." I'd already figured out what religious affiliation they had. So I said, "Well, when the Jews start paying taxes on their synagogues, and the Catholics start paying taxes on their churches and convents, Jehovah's Witnesses will likewise pay taxes on their property. Because after all," I said, "Jehovah's Witnesses don't make the laws. We just obey them." And it so happens that we do pay taxes on the Bossett and the Standish because they do not belong to the society. They belong to this financial group. But I forgot that argument. Couldn't think of everything. And now what else for expansion? Going down Columbia Heights on the left side, as you get to the brow of the hill going down to our offices, we have 2 brick buildings that are now being used for our missionary students and are being used for our tape duplication factory. We turn out about 20,000 tapes a day in that factory. Now, we need this space for an expansion to the Bethel home. So what we plan to do is destroy these 2 brick buildings and build a 30-story skyscraper right there on Brooklyn Heights. Now, we have a society in Brooklyn Heights that is called the Brooklyn Heights Historical Preservation Society or something of that nature. Sometimes I think it's hysterical rather than historical. but they do everything to stop our society from expanding. And so recently, Mayor Koch was visiting in the neighborhood, and the local press went to him and tried to provoke him to find out, well, what about these Jehovah's Witnesses, this Watchtower Society that wants to build a skyscraper on Brooklyn Heights? And this is what Koch said. Koch refused to take a position on the 30-story dormitory which the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society proposes to build as an extension of the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses at the northern tip of Brooklyn Heights. Quote, "It's not my policy to take a position on a particular project before I've been briefed on the pluses and minuses," he said. So happens he's a very crafty and pragmatic politician. Now, the mayor did offer a word of praise for the zealous missionary fundamentalists, saying, quote, "I think they are an asset to the city of New York. I think that putting aside the religious aspect, I think they are very brave in their religion and have withstood oppression in the Soviet Union and elsewhere, and I want to commend them for their good works." So there they were trying to stir up the mob for us, and Koch didn't buy it. He says, "I commend Jehovah's Witnesses. They're an asset to the city of New York." He said any proposed building would be evaluated on the merits. It has nothing to do with religion. And therefore, that sounds very positive, and we are sincerely hoping that soon we will have permission to build the 30-story skyscraper so that we can expand our Bethel family in accordance with the needs of the preaching work around the world. Now, there's one other point I want to mention to you, brothers. You've read about in the Awake magazine of October. I'm talking about the Awake magazines of October. Did you love those magazines in 4 colors? Did you find them attractive? Well, soon we'll be getting the Watchtowers in 4 colors starting in January, and Jehovah willing, later on, we'll also get the Awakes constantly in 4 colors, and this is going to be marvelous. Can you imagine, brothers, that they have the Watchtower in October in 4 colors in Swahili in Africa, but we didn't get it here. And so we're making the publications more attractive. But in the wake of October, we had a report on the new assembly hall in New Jersey. And this is actually a wonderful place. I saw the place when it was in ruins 2 years ago, and it is incredible what the brothers have accomplished. This Stanley Theatre was built in 1928, as the article told us, and it is what they call an atmosphere theatre. If I can describe it to you, you'll see some of it on the slides, but by this you'll understand it better. An atmosphere theatre, because when it was built in such a way that you would feel you were walking into an Italian city of the Renaissance period. And so when you walk into the theatre, you look up at the balcony, and starting way up in the top of the balcony, and this theatre holds 4,300 people, and not a single column or pillar in the theatre. Starting way up in the balcony, you see an Italian city, as if you were looking down a street. Different shapes of windows, houses, little side streets, doors, glass-stained windows. And when you reach the platform, it's a replica of the Rialto Bridge. Over the platform, you can actually walk over this bridge, and then up the other side, the rest of the city, entirely different architectural design. And then when the lights go out, the ceiling is totally black, except for hundreds of stars that are an exact replica of the night sky. And some of these stars actually twinkle. Actually, just like a planetarium, as good as a planetarium. And then they'll bring an effect whereby clouds start drifting across the sky. So it really is a wonderful theatre. Well, now, this is a letter we received, sent in by a man who wrote to the Jersey newspaper. And this is what he said, under the heading, Wonderful Work. And this, again, is to illustrate the mind of Jacob rather than the mind of Esau, appreciating spiritual values. The citizens of Jersey City can certainly be grateful to the Jehovah's Witnesses for their wonderful work on the Stanley Theatre. Indeed, they have performed something of a miracle for this town by opening our eyes to what can be done when people care and work together for a positive cause. I was an usher back in 1961 when the Stanley was still a very beautiful building with a palatial interior. Watching its decline and destruction over the years was nothing short of heartbreaking. Witnessing the same, there was nothing short of heartbreaking. Then he goes on to say, but today the Stanley is a great success story because the Jehovah's Witnesses have restored it with such sensitivity, patience, and an obvious respect for beauty. Their countless hours spent in this labor of love has brought a bit of paradise back to earth, and the Stanley now stands as a monument to their faith and devotion. He said that Jehovah's Witnesses could not have given Jersey City a better gift of goodwill and good work. And to think the former administration, and this was a Catholic administration, a Catholic mayor who tried to stop us from getting a hold of the theater, the former administration tried to block them from performing this miracle. Indeed, Jersey City could use thousands more like them. So he would like to see more witnesses in Jersey City. Anyone who has visited their wonderful open house recently came away with a great deal of respect for these gracious, kind, and gentle people. So, brothers, it's good to be able to give you this encouraging news from every angle and from all parts of the earth, and especially from the world headquarters of Jehovah's people. And so we come back to the question we have been considering. Do we appreciate our inheritance? Whose attitude will we have? Will we have the mind of Esau or the mind of Jacob? Will we disdain or will we appreciate? What is worth more to us? Our inheritance? The life that is life indeed on a paradise earth, living forever with our brothers and sisters, to be able to see the resurrection, to be able to welcome back our loved ones, and do we think of that in real terms, your loved ones, to be able to welcome them back and give them a witness and take a Bible study with them? Because that's what we're talking about. Now, do we appreciate that? Or do we prefer some transient pleasures, some transient possessions? What are they? Do we prefer a plate of lentil stew? Are we going to say, quick, give me a swallow of the red? Thank you.
You might like to stand now, and we might consider singing a song together, song number 14, Be Glad, You Nation. Now, as with the Mexico earthquake relief, it is not recommended that clothing and so forth be collected and sent there, but if any personally desire that they want to help, they could send a check to the Society labeled for the Colombian volcano relief. Now, the next portion of the special event, as Brother Beveridge has made reference to, by the way, you might be seated now,